What's up, everyone, and welcome to the 22nd episode of Super Brain Radio. We are now on to the second edition of Chapter 5, Surfing. And as you may or may not remember, this surfing chapter is all about traversing the ups and downs of goal attainment. And the 4 episodes within this chapter are going to be increasing in complexity as we kind of learn more and more about what it means to go through ups and downs, but still linearly attain your goal. And again, I'm going to continue to remind you all that the best things in the biological adaptation window, if you will, are going to be things that occur in a cyclic manner. We've ever so lightly touched upon that with fat loss. How if you go too fast, we're going to have some ionic repercussions that are going to make it seem like fat loss has slowed, although it technically has not. Now, obviously, regardless of where you are in your fat loss journey, there's going to be a point where, whether purposely or not purposely, you move too fast. The same when it comes to muscle building, which we're going to be talking about this week and each of the subsequent episodes. Now, the reason this is extremely important to rationalize, whether you yourself or the trainee or the coach, is because we need to extrapolate and look further out. We need to zoom out, and we need to see things for where are we in the cycle, and where does this individual cycle match up with our long-term goal attainment strategies? So if you've heard me talk about muscle building in the past, you've probably heard me talk about IGF, the muscle maturation cycle, and all these things. Now, as you can probably inference, Super Brain Radio is not going to be taking that route. I'll lightly touch upon it because it is important, it's necessary to at least know what's going on. But more importantly, we're talking today about what does it mean to actually build muscle tissue, what considerations do we need to look at, and everything along that line. So, you might start laughing at the title where I say, can't afford double, don't vacation. And that's because out of all the skills, adaptations, whatever, I've helped people kind of gain over the years through consultations or private consulting and management, whatever it is, building muscle is always what I've found to be the most costly. Now, the concept is if you're going on vacation, you shouldn't vacation somewhere where just paying for your hotel and airfare is putting a dent in the bank. It's a good rule of thumb for financial responsibility to vacation somewhere where if you had to pay double, you could still afford to go and enjoy it. Now, that's because obviously you're getting food along the way. You're probably going to let loose at some point and spend a little more than you wanted to on something, whatever it may be. You should always be able to afford double the vacation's cost. Now, this is really important because the development of skeletal muscle, regardless of what you want it to do, which we'll dive into in a minute, is going to be very costly because we need to go through continual cycles of breakdown. And I don't just mean breakdown, oh, we walked a couple miles, we're tired. No, that's not at all what it is. We need to target fibers very specifically, and furthermore, we can go as deep as targeting the ventral or dorsal portion of a fiber, meaning the same muscle fiber on the front and back does slightly different things because, you guessed it, geometrically, there's a front and a back. So when it contracts, the back does something exactly reciprocal to the front. Now, that's just talking about muscle architecture and orientation. We can talk about who's recycling energy here, meaning is it fast via creatine? Is it done under oxygen debt via glycolysis? Is it long, low, and slow via beta oxidation, which we talked about in the fat loss a little bit? Now, those two main factors are going to come together and they're going to describe who, from the muscle fiber perspective, is going to be seeing the change. So for example, maybe we targeted our type 2 fibers, which are known for being explosive, right? And we train them in a long, low, and slow manner. We are now going to cause an adaptive signal that says the type 2 fibers need to increase in their work capacity, in their duration, and their ability to participate in X. Now, we can do the exact opposite. We can take type 1 fibers, which are going to be deeper in the muscle, closer to the bone. They're going to be a little bit less on the force production, a little bit more on the blood flow and ions and all that stuff, end of things. We can actually train them to be more explosive. Maybe not explosive being the right word, but more tensile, we'll call it. They can squeeze. So if you're the type of lifter who can go very, very fast but can't grind through a rep, you have deficiency in the contractile ability of your type 1 muscle fibers. Now, the reason this is important is because hypertrophy, getting bigger, is just a marker of cross-sectional area. How 3D are the rubber bands attached to your bones? But very rarely does that actually matter. Besides potentially bodybuilding, and the only reason I say potentially is because I've worked with plenty of professional bodybuilders, and I know this stuff still matters at the top level. But you can just say, for the sake of judging and how the sport's managed, that it might not matter as much. But if you're doing something that has to do with whether it's a cognitive or sports performance skill, it actually really, really matters what's underneath the hood. So when we look under the hood, these are the types of questions we need to ask, and more importantly, we need to start to look at the timeline for change. How far are you from where you need to be, and ultimately, what type of adaptive signal is going to get you there? So you need to start viewing things like a subtraction equation. Look at your end goal. Maybe it's to be faster. So then you need to start targeting, well, what's the difference between me and the top speed I want to attain? Can I actually hit the top speed but only maintain it for 3 steps after I start? Or am I nowhere near the top speed? And we're going to avoid things talking about leverage and technique and mechanics, because that just fogs it. But let's say maybe you just aren't strong enough, or you don't have the capacity to maintain the top speed that you ultimately desire. That's where you go back and look under the hood now. So maybe you touched that top speed, but you couldn't maintain it. Now we're going to go back to that type 2 fiber, long, low, and slow thing we talked about. Or maybe it's, wow, I maintained the same speed the whole time, but I'm nowhere near when I want to be. Then we're going to go down to those type 1 fibers having greater tensile and contractile ability, so that flatlined speed curve just goes up a couple notches. So this is probably a lot at once. Now, I really want to start to drive and hit home on how can you do this for yourself. As simple as asking these questions is all you need to be focused on. Then, what you really need to do is grow some grit and be awesome at executing a plan. If you ever see someone who's just a little bit more jacked than they were naturally meant to be, whether they're the dumbest and least methodical person on the planet or vice versa, you have to give them credit for committing to something over time. A singular training session is not enough to create an adaptive signal. In fact, we know that it actually takes up to 72 hours to fully recover from a single training session. And that actually might make you stop for a second and be like, wait a minute, really? Especially if you're training more than 3 days a week, you're technically never fully recovered. And that's where the adaptive signal lives. It's a compounding effect, and more importantly, it's a cohort of similar sessions that you've trained and participated in that come together and tell the brain, we've experienced this type of stress for long enough that we need to make a change to be better at this. That's ultimately what makes a change in the first place. Now, we just make it a muscle or skeletal muscle change by targeting that stress and adaptive response to the muscle fibers underneath the hood you want. So, what do you want this muscle to do at the end? What adaptations are actually useful to you? And all of those types of questions are the very, very first things you need to ask. How long do I need to maintain the performance I'm seeking? Whatever it may be. Next, you actually need to develop something. And this doesn't need to be done every day. It can. It could also be done 3 times a week and really trash yourself. All that it needs to be is you need to participate in the exact type of stress that you want to adapt from. Furthermore, you need to start to look towards, how can I? No fucking way. Oh, wait. Are we still here? Oh, you guys saw me freak out for a quick second. I thought this paused, but it did not. We are very lucky. I'm not in my normal setup right now. I'm actually working the Live Golf Tournament in Boston, so I'm actually holding this microphone. I wasn't even sure if this was going to work out, but I'm glad it still is, and hope I didn't scare any of you guys right there. So, we need to really be super certain about what things we're participating in. We need to do it often enough, somewhere between 3 and 5 times a week. And most importantly, you also need to participate in things that are pretty similar. So, what I mean by that is, let's say you want to run 2 miles an hour faster. Instead of just trying to hit that speed often, it would be smart to participate in something that lets you go a little bit faster than you ultimately want to go. It would also be smart to try to maintain like 90% of that speed for as long as you can, and mostly participate in things surrounding the ultimate goal. Because you can't just do one thing and expect to get a total outcome. Like I said earlier, we need to apply a type of stress that tells the brain that this is chronic, consistent, and similar enough that we need to learn. Lastly, you just need to repeat, rinse, and move on with this cycle. For some of you, this may be longer than others. It mainly also determines the adaptation. So, what I mean by that is, let's say you selected something that's pretty difficult to attain. Let's say you want to dunk a basketball, and you're nowhere near that. You automatically just need to assume, and this should really happen in your decision making process, I have quite a few steps to get through before I get there. Most importantly, I need to go through a lot of rinse and repeat cycles before I get there. And that's going to impact how you approach things. It's ultimately a balance of kind of what we've talked about in the past. I believe it was chapter 3 or 4, recovery rates. If your rate of recovery is low, you cannot continue to participate. So let's say that goal is pretty far away from you. The very, very first thing you need to do is increase your capacity to friggin' participate so that you can actually participate and attain the adaptive signal you want. This is the issue that tends to thwart people. They get motivated, I'm going to do this, and then they try to jump into the meat and potatoes of something and either get really, really trashed and no results, or get some results and get hurt along the way, or just feel confused and feel like they're not even making progress in the first place. It's because you can only train as much as you can recover from. Once you supersede that recovery threshold, now more of this training is seen a little bit more of a threat. The immune system is going to be more involved, and so on and so forth. Now things start getting hairy. So my ultimate piece of advice for you all is to follow a parabolic curve when it comes to attaining your muscle building goals or anything related to them. Start building long, low, and slow to a peak. Once you get to that peak, start slowly building back down before you decide to make an assessment on if you actually made enough change. Peak stress is going to come at a different time than peak adaptation, and that's arguably the most important thing to remember. Along with that, it's exuberantly important to remember that it's the environment in which you train something that causes adaptation, not the actual thing you're training itself. So if you want to get faster at sprinting, sprinting alone will not make you faster. Sprinting in an environment where you're recycling creatine at a high rate and still able to hit high speeds will make you faster. And that's an insanely important delineation that if you go through this episode one more time, you should be able to pick up on.